Okay, so this is, I suppose we'll call this part two of the Foxcote Manor. Hopefully, you've seen part one, which is a real basic review. Now, quite often I don't do torque tests on locomotives because I can tell, you know, during the acceleration or even in the running section when it's pulling coaches or wagons, I can generally tell if the torque's good or not so good. But the Foxcote Manor was much better than I was expecting. Um, so let me explain that. I've seen quite a few of the Generation One, the first releases. Uh, Various YouTubers, content creators had made videos showing the performance of the locomotive. So that's kind of what I thought I would be buying, and that kind of would have been okay. I don't have much of any inclines on my layout, so the performance of the Generation One would have been okay for me, quite honestly. Typically, I'm mirroring the Cambrian Coastway type of service, which would have only been a couple of coaches for a rural route. So not having a massive amount of torque wasn't a big deal. But I was really shocked in a pleasant way of the performance. And I did a lot of research yesterday whether uh, Dapol had changed the motor or reported that there was a performance increase in the Generation 2. But there's absolutely nothing been posted by Dapol or anybody else. And I really don't mind making this extra video because I love making discoveries, whether it's historical or something to do with engineering or scientific. I just love that. That's a part of the model railway or the railway hobby that I do love. So today we're going to do a torque test. I've got railway workers down here because what I'm recreating is a scenario that happened in 1952 where British Rail did testing on the Manor class, and by making two modifications to the locomotive, they increased its tractive effort from like £10,000 up to over £20,000 of force. So I'm kind of recreating a moment in history here. So let's just bring the locomotive slightly forward. And I'm going to use the common garden way of putting my hands in front of the buffers. I think that is the proof of the pudding. There's absolutely tons and tons of torque there. And if you have a Manor class, Generation 1, um, just do that little simple test. Or there's plenty of reviews online where you can have a look at that. And if you've got one of the Generation 2s, it's also worth doing that test. Um, so, so what's happened here? Well, they could have changed the gearing, or they've maybe changed the motor. My personal feeling on this is they changed the 5-pole motor to a higher performance model. And why did they do that? Well, Dapol were competing against Accurascale or for Manor class locomotive sales, and the Generation 1 Dapol locomotive did receive criticism for the locomotive being a little bit sluggish and not having the pulling power that the Accurascale version had. Um, And it's strange, there's two parts to this. One was, I was shocked by its acceleration and top end speed, but also its weight. Its weight was, I thought it was heavier than was expecting. And I actually double checked the weight again today, and it's correct. I think it's 353.08 grams. When Sam's Trains weighed his one, it was 351, so pretty much close. But so it's got plenty of weight there with the die-cast chassis and the running plate. And it all came back to, well, why is it performing differently? And I did a lot of research and I was like, well, the torque test will do this, because even if I take the body shell off, the motor has a steel housing around it. And I don't want to completely disassemble that because I have nothing to compare it with. I don't have the Generation 1. So the best way to do it, and the safest way without damaging the locomotive, was to do that torque test. I would argue it's a different motor that they've put in there. I don't believe it's a gearing, because the top end speed is much faster than the Generation 1, and the torque's greater. So the torque and the high end speed tells me it's the motor. I'd love to hear your comments. Please add them in the comments box. And if I was extremely flush right now, I think I would get another one.